to what's going on around the particular community and what's controlling our community and our people, then we're lost. I mean, and I myself, I do not like the feeling when law enforcement get behind me, and as a black male, nobody should have to feel like that, or a black female, that this encounter may end up a result of you losing your life. But this is the reality that we're living in the 21st century. Regardless of what you may look like, regardless of your theology or your doctorate degree. When law enforcement get behind you as a black male or black individual, you become nervous, and we shouldn't have to feel like this. But first and foremost, it starts with education, right? So we got to educate the younger generations of these different laws and what's going on and what's really holding and maybe hindering them from moving forward and progressing forward in life, because it's hard to sidestep something that you know is a barrier if you don't even see this barrier as even existing, right? And so we don't see this barrier even exist until what? Till we're in a cage. Till we got 25 years, or we got put out on the street because we couldn't hold this particular job because somebody's being racially biased against you on the job. And so it's a host of different things like that. But education is the key component, learning these different legislations, these different laws, and really demanding more from people who are in position of power and organizing. So if people who are in position of power, such as legislators, are not doing what you feel they should be doing, you organize your community. And what you do is you put people in power who you know will be for the people. And this is one of the things that our people have not been doing, is really organizing collectively, or if they have, it's only a spurts of a movement. And then guess what? When that movement kind of fades out and die out, and the people get older, the torch is not passed, the torch is dropped. And this is why we see a heavy influx of mass incarceration. This is why we see a heavy influx of mental illness, particularly Black and brown individuals being diagnosed from even when they're in school up until now, leading from the school to prison pipeline. So if you really look at it, it is really systemic, and it all plays an intricate part of why the prison systems are flooded like they're flooded with Black and brown population, why the court system is flooded like they're flooded with Black and brown population, why homelessness is flooded like it's flooded with Black and brown population. So you got to educate yourself to these particular systems. But most importantly, y'all, lean heavy on these different lawmakers. Learn the laws, teach it to these younger generations, and put it in a way that they can be receptive to it, right? So you can't go into these communities speaking a foreign language, because they're going to look at you like you foreign, even though you look like them. They're going to look at you like you're foreign, and this right here is going to lead to cognitive dissonance. They're going to reject what you're saying just because you didn't come in the form that they're supposed that they identify with. And so it's about identifying yourself with these particular communities. And to answer the question earlier about mentorship starts with particularly you being in your community, right? It starts with the neighbor that's next door. It starts with your friends' kids, just giving them that talk and say, hey, man, you might shouldn't be doing it, or what you think about this, and just challenging them in different ways. So you don't have to necessarily wait until they make a mistake to correct them. You could just start giving them the game like a lot of older heads used to do to us back in the day, right? So they would just give us the game when we would see certain things. And that's what we have to start doing now and put it in a 21st century way that they would understand it, right? To probably keep them safe from something as simple as their encounter with law enforcement. But education is a component, y'all, and each one teaching one and passing down that knowledge. But most importantly, stand on these different legislators and organizing, strategizing, demobilizing.
Thank you, Brother Pittman. And I highlighted the examples of mass incarceration and police brutality, but you also brought up a lot of other things and ills that we're faced with, such as systemic racism and things that we face every day within our communities. And you also often lifted up some solutions. Is there anyone else that would like to chime in to this question as well at this time?
Yeah, I would just to hit on what the brother spoke so well of, all of that, man. For me, criminal justice system or criminal justice reform is one of those big issues that I believe is affecting our community and has historically been violent towards Black and brown persons. And now we see in the data and even in media in many ways, this increase of violence and even death towards our Black sisters, and brown sisters. So that would be one. Lack of economics. Just here locally, take for example, we are one of the state's most economically stratified counties, right? Lenoir County. We're in the reports, and so what I do know is that Black business owners, small time business owners, are having a hard time, even during this COVID pandemic, right? And you talk about PP loans. Many of them didn't receive it. And we know that, because we're not necessarily at the table, or those who are in charge of the money, oftentimes that we get left out. And so that's another thing. And even when you talk about, the lack of education or access to education to get those particular jobs that pay more and so forth, we bear the brunt of oftentimes institutions or jobs that practice, unfair, practices when it comes to unemployment. Also, like community. Also, I have our community members who are our church members not having adequate access to health care. We know that we are still fighting that in North Carolina. And in many places like mine, when you talk about redistricting or redistricting and gerrymandering, when I look up there on the state of North Carolina, I have to deal with, Jim Perry as a representative of mine. And I know when I look up his profile, he's over healthcare access and all things healthcare. And it's just like, so I know this person doesn't really care for it, but it affects people in my community. So what can we do about it? And so again, voting, access to just, voting, fair voting. And so a lot of things, education, kids in our community suffer from, quality education, right? Quality food. We deal with food insecurity. So there are a number of issues, you all, that really impact or are what I consider main issues in the Black community. In my community particularly, there's not one issue, but many that we almost have to fight simultaneously. They intersect and everything. So.
Thank you, Reverend Mumford and Brother Kerwin. One of the things that I heard that you both mentioned and that you lifted as solutions for our community is that we can't continue to organize in silos. That has kind of hurt us as a whole. So we must organize as a collective group. We must continue to educate. Is one of the common denominators that you all talked about. And I heard something else that you said was that we need to make sure that we have informed voters, that we're getting to the polls, and that we're changing some policy and some legislation by the people that we elect and put into office. We're going back to the church following that question. We have no other choice but to go back to the church. Given amidst this pandemic, and Dr. Barr, I want you to start us off with this question. Following this pandemic, there's been studies that have shown that 30% of the church will not return. And here recently, there has already been a drastic decrease and a shift from church participation. What do you think is the cause of that? And how do you think we reach out to turn that around or to get that back on the upward spiral?
Well, I think the research itself, I call some of it into question. So like the Barna Research Study and the group that they use to actually facilitate some of the research, they're not necessarily connected to the Black church. And I'm not saying that any research you do has to be founded in that group itself, but the Black church is unique. So I do hear that research study. I do think about it, but I'm also mindful that the way it was collected might not be really representative of what the experience is going to be. I myself have talked to a lot of pastors around the state, and most would tell you that they've actually seen an increase. More people are involved and engaged in their Bible studies and in the preaching moment itself. Now, I won't ignore the fact that there has been a decrease in some areas. And I don't want to be overly blunt, but I think some of it is, we've just kind of jumped in the car, threw it on a cruise for too long, and we become somewhat disconnected from reality in our very own communities. because what works well for the church, we assume works well for the community. And I think there are a lot of churches that have gone left and the community's gone right, or the community's gone left and the church has gone right. And so I think some of that is because we've stuck it on autopilot and haven't updated our methods and our means of reaching out to people and connecting with people, knowing that there was an era and an age where the church was the center of the community. And there were a lot of reasons, especially in the civil rights movement, why the church was that place where everybody gathered. Well, now I just go to Facebook. I got all the voice I need. And whereas one point we needed something to amplify our voice, to be our sound system per se. And now the church is not necessarily that for the community. So I think that it is representative of the church having become disconnected from its community. But I think also our families are disintegrating. And, you know, the family makes up the church. If you don't have families, you don't really have a church. And I think we're seeing a disconnection in our families and how we used to be so tightly woven together, and we'd come together for cookouts and we do our things together. And now, because things have gotten somewhat better in some ways, you know, I live over here, y'all live over there, and it's too far to drive 20 minutes to come to something that you're having, or whatever the case may be, because I want to have my own thing. And I think we're seeing a disintegration of family. That is, and I know it may sound crazy, that's the scarier thing to me than the church membership numbers going down. I said this some 12 years ago to one of my senior ladies in church. And I said, you know, 10, 15 years from now, there won't be any membership as you know it. You know, it's going to be gift. The gift's there. You use the gift when it's around. But the gift always being there is not going to always be the case. But I think we've seen some drifting, definitely by the church. And then also the bigger thing is the community that is made up of family, that is disintegrating. And we're kind of each having our own little siloed families, and we're not as deeply connected because we had to have each other. I ain't have enough sugar, but I knew I could come to you and I could get some sugar from you, or we would come to the family stuff because we be, man, if I ain't had a good meal in a minute, it's going to go down at the family thing. Now we can just go buy it and bring it back home. And even if it's off the 99-cent menu, and just do our own thing. So I think that's the bigger thing that we're seeing. But I think it's a great opportunity for the church to get back to the grassroots of connecting with people at the point of their need, connecting with family, the needs of families. It's a wonderful opportunity for the church. So I think there has definitely been some fall off and multiple layers of reasons. And even those major two that I named, with the church kind of drifting away, just being on autopilot and kind of doing reverse FUBU, for us, by us. We're doing it all about us instead of it really being all about Christ and the people we're trying to engage with. And then families themselves just kind of separating and dividing and not being as close as we once were. Those are reasons why I think we're seeing some decline.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. I'm going to ask Brother Kerwin if you'll jump in and add some insight to that question as well, please.
Yeah. So in my opinion, in all honesty and transparency, while you may be seeing a decline in participation in church, and so what I'm seeing, in all honesty, is a gap between generations, right? So we have an older generation and we have a younger generation. And so this younger generation is not connecting with this older generation, and this older generation is not necessarily connecting with this younger generation. And so what we need to see is individuals come out of the church and go into these communities and start really being mentors to these individuals, right? So you can't see a brother walking down the streets with his pants hanging down and kind of disembowel and kind of ostracize this brother. You need to go up to this brother and see what's going on in this brother's life, because this brother may need something that you may have. And as a black male, I'm pretty sure it's some type of wisdom that you could give him, because at one point in time, we was all this brother. We may didn't sag our pants, but we may did the styles and the ways of that particular area that we was in. And so what we need to see is individuals come out to church and get into the streets. And so now, particularly during this social justice movement and high impact social justice climate, we really need to see individuals in the church take more of a pivotal stand against what the injustices that are going on right now, particularly within the same communities that the churches reside in. And I don't mean just particularly marches when something happens. So it takes that long-term engagement that really buy into, and for people to buy into the church and say, you know what, this pastor really care about us. This deacon really care about us. He came by my house. He stopped me when I was on the corner. He slipped me a little money when I was hungry and I ain't have nothing to eat, so I wouldn't have to go out there and hit somebody in the head for something. And so it is small things like that that we must take and really utilize in order to bring these people into this house. You got to come outside of this house. And it's going to take individuals really getting outside of that shell, thinking outside of the box, and really figuring out how to engage in this high socially justice climate and injustice climate, right? And it's going to take more than just, in all honesty and transparency, y'all, it's going to take more than just marches. It's going to take more than just backdoor meetings. It's going to take more than just we sit up here, we're going to pray together, right? Because faith without works is dead, so you can pray about it. But when you get the answer that come to your mind, don't be scared to go out there in the community and really tell these brothers how you feel, but in a respectful manner and respectfully, and they'll receive it. You'll be more surprised. And, and I don't go into communities preaching the gospel, so to speak, coming from a biblical testimony, but I preach the gospel of the word of truth, right? So I speak truth to power. And so I can go into any community and speak truth to power, and I can identify with the people in this community because I am of this community, and we're all of the same community. It's like the same the same nation, we just different tribes, and we may have different languages. And so we all know the same language because it's universal. Why? Because we Black. In all honesty and transparency. And so it's going to take individuals to come out of their house. And what I mean by the house, I mean the church, to come out into the streets and to go into these individuals' houses and really speak that word and that truth and that wisdom to them, to guide them. And that will bring the people to you. You ain't got to go look for them. They're going to come to you then.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have time for one more person to jump in on that, and then we're going to close it out with one final question that I have for tonight before we turn to some questions that are in the chat. And so, Reverend Brinson, if you want to jump in on that question before we turn it over to the last question.
Yes, I think my counterparts did a great job of answering that. Real quick, I just want to raise that although there is some decline, there's also decline across the board in church participation. But what we are seeing is amongst the races, Black folk are still attending churches and involved in worship at higher rates than any other race. And that says something about what we are doing within our churches to be able to continue to see that that particular type of consistency within our community. And it really gets down to this, that our people are a people of faith. Whether we were practicing Yoruba, whether we blend our religions in Voodoo and Santeria, whether it is African spirituality, Black people are people of faith, and that faith is maintaining some level of consistency within our community, and it has allowed us to continue to be the moral conscience of this country. And as Brother Kerwin has said, and as Reverend Barr has said, the church is going to have to look different in the 21st century. The church is going to have to be the church of Jesus, which got beyond the four walls and went out into the community and served the most marginalized and disenfranchised folks in our community. I think the thing that has happened to the church that has been to our disadvantage is that we have taken on the culture of market economy, which has imposed upon us individualism, and we need to adopt new models of how we're going to do infrastructure in our church. So moving away from maybe a business-oriented model to maybe a nonprofit model where the leadership is decentralized, where more people can get involved, where we are making sure that we are doing outreach and making sure that we are modeling this beloved community and not just doing charity, but making sure that we are getting to the root causes within our community and seeking to be like Jesus. Jesus's ministry eradicated ills. Charity just throws a Band-Aid on it. We should be modeling how to eradicate ills within our community. And I think those are going to be some of the things that we have to do in the 21st century if we are going to see folks come back to the faith and continue to be a part of our worship community, if we're going to see the church continue on to be relevant in the 21st century.
Thank you, gentlemen. And as one of our participants said, Mrs. Joyce, and I think all of us has alluded to this, she said the gospel works. We don't have to come up with any gimmicks, any tricks, but the gospel in itself, which is really communal, which is what we were talking about, community, being present, being there for one another, uplifting each other. That's what the gospel is all about. And Dr. Barr brought up a point about the civil rights movement. That's one of the reasons why it was as effective as it was in that time, is because they had a communal approach. They organized together, they came together. And just as Curran said, we got to continue to reach out and go out into the community. And as Reverend Brinson just summed it up and brought it back home for us, because it's going to look different. It looks different for us already. And so we just have to take the reins of that, how it looks different, and make sure that we're implementing the things that we've known that has worked for generations, that can still work now if we just implement them. A lot of times it just takes the implementation of it. The final question for tonight, gentlemen, and this is open to all of us. We're going back to the family dynamics, and that's one of the things that we've talked about here. And it says, the question here is, only 38.7% of African-American minors live with their parents. Do you think there's a role the church can play in ensuring stable households? And if so, how?
Hey, Reverend Fairley, I just want to clarify. You meant both parents. You meant both parents, right?
Yeah. Yes. In two-parent homes versus the word stable. I didn't mean to say stable home.
Go ahead, Reverend Benson. I'll come in after you.
Sure. I believe that I always get a little nervous about saying what more can the church do. Being a person who was once critical of the church and now having to serve in church, excuse me, I realize that the church does a lot in the community. Whether we like to admit it or not, whether we are doing the right things or whether we can do better, that's another question. But we do a lot in the community, and folks don't really know how much they need the church. And I like to say this, until summertime when folks need tables and chairs. You'd be surprised how much the church is called on to meet basic needs, or we're burying someone's loved one, or we're christening someone's child, or pastors getting up at 3 a.m. to go out to bail someone's child out of jail. So those things are going on, and it's the work that folks never hear about, but those things are going on. And I always caution to say, what more can the church do? But in this regarding answering this particular question, I think we're also going to have to be real about what family is going to look like in the 21st century. It's going to take on new models in the way in which it's going to look. We also have queer families that are represented within our community. And so the church is going to have to be clear on how to address the queer question. The church is also going to have to think about, as Dr. Barr raised earlier, what does it mean to be in community? I think, as I stated earlier, communalism in America has taken a beating because of market-based capitalism and this notion of individualism. And so the church's work, I believe, has to be on being ready to embrace new models of what the family structure looks like, and also doing the work of bringing the community back together and seeing the church as not so much as an institution, but a community within a community, to be able to do major things around outreach and impacting people's lives and being able to be transformative in people's lives. I think those things have to be considered as we are trying to address the issue of children not being able to be engaged in family in the way in which they need to during the 21st century.
Just adding to what Reverend Brinson said, with the statistic that you just quoted, I think for the church, the part that we could play, again, my simplest definition of ministry is that ministry meets people at the point of their needs. And so if that statistical information is really geared more towards saying that children aren't growing up in a two-family home, I think that's one thing. If it's really making reference to the statistic that's growing that says children are living with their parents longer, I wasn't really sure which of the two that question was leaning towards, but either one. I think for the church, just facilitating that need through your local congregation and seeing what they're saying about that. So if it's the side that says that there are only 37% who are living in a two-family home, that again just goes back to some of our foundational teaching. And it takes two to make one, and some of the old things that used to be said that still make good sense. But if it takes two to make, it takes two to raise. And again, that's just some of our foundational principles. But still, the approach to that needs to be updated so that it meets where society is now. Reverend Brinson brought up the good point of, families aren't going to look the same. And as much as it may make some people feel uncomfortable, they're going to be same-sex families. That's just real life. I know, again, for some of us, that may be, that issue for you, but that's the reality. And then figuring out, again, how can we then serve that? If we're talking to the side that says that there's a higher percentage of people who are now living at home instead of getting their own place, that is one of those statistics I've never quite been able to get my hands around, because I know I couldn't wait to leave home. I never came back home after college. After I graduated college, I was home for about 6 months and I was out. But I have read several times that information about younger people staying with their parents longer than they used to. Now, real talk is, hey, they're coming out with some serious student loan debt, and the jobs aren't a whole lot better in a lot of instances than if you just got a high school diploma. And that's just real talk. So I think there are some societal issues that could be leading to that. But again, it's still another opportunity that I think the church can connect with as far as relevancy, to help start talking about independence and budgeting and entrepreneurial opportunities and, those things that get us ready to really be productive citizens of society. So I still think there's a very important part the church could play in meeting and responding to that need.
Yeah, and if I could just add real quick too, I was really challenged with that part too, Reverend Farley, that two-parent home, because again, as Reverend CJ and others have hinted to, Reverend Dr. Barr have hinted to, is that the family dynamic looks different. And what's wrong with a one-parent home, right? A single parent, home. And so there's nothing wrong with it. They work. In fact, we see historically that single parent homes have worked. And so I think my biggest thing is, when you talk about single families, they're okay, right? And I'm focused more on the family as a unit, their well-being and them being whole. And then, the church addressing, home and community. And the way we do that is if we go back to what is called classical and neoclassical functions of pastoral care, right? And we start talking about the church, right, doing the work of guiding, right? Practices such as, healing and sustaining, guiding, reconciling, and nurturing, right? The classical functions. And then also neoclassical functions, which are advocacy and liberation. And so for me, the church, if we continue to do that, then we can address those homes, single or two-parent, or those who may look different than traditional homes have looked or families have looked, right? And so Jesus, for some examples, like text examples, Jesus says in Matthew 25 and 35 and 39, right? When you talk about making families and communities whole, right? Jesus says, when I was hungry, you fed me, right? You gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me food. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I needed clothes, you clothed me, right? When I was sick, you took care of me. In prison, you visited me. And then also he says in Luke 4:18, he talks about how the Spirit of the Lord is upon him and to proclaim the good news, right? Proclaim freedom to prisoners, recovery of sight, and to set the oppressed free. And all of that to say is that, that's the job of the church. And that is found in those functions of pastoral care, right? To help, folks in our community and families reconcile, right? To help them build in which they are able to sustain themselves, right? To heal themselves. What does the work of healing look like? Because there are many hurts and traumas and violence that have been faced in our community. How do we work in a way that's healing to the family unit, but also those in our community? How do we engage the community of faith versus the faith community? And what does that look like? And how do we all work together in this intersecting work where what you do is what you do, but our works come together and address those issues? So again, to me, it's just back to just those functions. If we operate in those functions, I think that we can help as the church, and we can play a big part in impacting families, period, in our communities.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers to that question and for all that you've done tonight. This has been a wonderful and enriching experience. Our time is coming to a close. I appreciate you all giving me the opportunity and allowing me to moderate this conversation. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brother Saeem, that's going to give us some closing remarks. Until the next time.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Reverend Fairley. Thank you, Dr. Tony Barr, Brother Kerwin Pittman, and Reverend James Mumford, along with Reverend C.J. Brinson. Thank you all. I won't be on here for long. I just want to say this. If you guys, I can't see the attendees, but if you raise your hand, maybe in the chat or something, just say you want to see this again. I think this is really good. I learned a lot. So let's do a part 2. If you agree we need a part 2, put it in the chat, please. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our state coordinator here in North Carolina, Ms. Danielle Brown. I thank you all very much.
Good evening, everyone. And oh my gosh, thank you guys so very much for such an amazing panel. This was so great. I couldn't have asked for anything better. You did great, amazing job. I see part 2s being requested all over the place, which I would definitely want a part 2 because I wanted to hear what Kerwin's response was going to be as well. I wanted to hear what that one was going to be. So I would love a part 2 to this so that we can have such an amazing, robust conversation. Everybody was so amazing. Thank you so very much. Just a quick thing. We are in the middle of Freedom Week. Now, whether I feel free or not is a whole nother ball game, but we are in the middle of Freedom Week, and it is so great to be a part. Juneteenth festivities were amazing yesterday across the state. I am like a whole different color from being out in the sun, but it everything was great. And today, to start this off with at the beginning with our Black fathers on Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers that are out there. Thank you. Tomorrow night we have an amazing panel again tomorrow night discussing the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides are on their way to North Carolina. They are in Tennessee today, but they are headed to us, and they will be here on Wednesday. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about the Freedom Rides. We're going to be having some amazing guests. You do not want to miss it. We definitely will be having some surprises tomorrow night. It's going to be great. So you don't want to miss that panel at all. On Tuesday, we are going to be doing a statewide voter registration, claiming our freedom papers and ensuring that we are making how we make those changes that Kerwin spoke of and Reverend Mumford spoke of so eloquently about how we make those changes. Well, it starts at the polls. So we have to make sure that people are registered to vote, and we're going to be doing that statewide with all of our partners, statewide partners, BVM partners. Everybody is jumping in to make sure that we're doing that. And then Wednesday on D-Day, the Freedom Rides will be here in North Carolina. You do not want to miss a moment of it. COVID-19 vaccination clinic that morning in Raleigh, that afternoon, a march for all of these egregious bills and things that are coming up against our people. We are marching and standing against all of that. And then the People's Concert, where we will have special guests. We will have our co-founders, Cliff and Latasha, will be here. So it is going to be amazing. And you will get to see our beautiful Blackest bus in America rolling through the state of North Carolina. And then we're headed on Thursday to pack the courtroom in Elizabeth City to stand with all of the protesters that were wrongfully arrested during protests. So y'all don't want to miss a minute of Freedom Week here in the state of North Carolina. So thank you for an amazing evening. Part 2, y'all let me know when y'all putting part 2 together. I just show up and do my part and keep it moving. I'm just told what to do by these wonderful, handsome men that's on here. So thank you. Have an amazing evening.
Good night, everybody.
Recording stopped.
Hey, Saheem.